Growing up as a military brat, our family moved several times across Canada in a span of 11 or so years. We stayed in old wartime family quarters, as they were inexpensive at the time. From a child to the day I left my home as a young adult, I first-handedly experienced what people often refer to as shadow people. Shadow people account for probably about 75% or so of my paranormal experiences. However, I've also been a witness to poltergeist-style activity, as well as both a ghost and UFO sighting. I can remember most of my experiences in well-preserved detail, even insignificant side details which are not even part of supernatural experience itself. I think this is because of how large an impact these events had on myself. The experiences really get burned into your memory. Through the years, I've shared my stories only with family and friends. I never had the motivation to share them publicly in fear of being ostracized. Now I can see that there are many others who think the same way as I do, and just as many or more who believe in supernatural phenomena, despite perhaps not experiencing anything firsthand. Yesterday, my brother called me to tell me what happened to him the night before. Now, I've experienced paranormal events with my brother in the past, and he's always been a very matter-of-fact type person. He's been staying with his son's family to help out until they move out of state, and he shares a room with his only granddaughter. Well, his granddaughter has a bunk bed, and hanging under the top bunk is a monkey with weird arms and legs, and it's hanging by its tail. He said he was sitting across the room reading, when all of a sudden this monkey started to drastically swing. He looked up from his book and saw it slow down and eventually stop. So he got up and went into the kitchen to get some coffee and asked his daughter-in-law if she threw something on her daughter's bed without him noticing, and she told him that she hadn't even entered the room all morning. After he explained why he was asking her those questions, she told him that it didn't surprise her one bit. Curious, he asked her why she made that comment, and she told him that the whole time they've lived there, they see people walking around out of the corner of their eyes, and shadows there shouldn't be. Funny thing was, that when visiting them a few years ago, I told my brother before he even lived there that I felt crowded, as if there was too much commotion going on, even when the room was quiet. I don't think it wants to harm anyone, I just think it was trying to tell my brother that it was there. I asked my mother if she had any paranormal experiences before I was born. She had quite a few, but this one from her youth was one of those stories that stood out to me. She said that she was in her 20s at that time, and one of my two siblings was still in diapers. She was hanging sheets and diapers on the clothesline in the backyard, and my two siblings were playing right next to her, when all of a sudden, the hair on the back of her neck and arms stood straight up, and it felt like she was being watched. She had an immediate sense of danger. She said that she saw something moving across the field next to the house, and when she noticed that this thing was not flesh and blood, more like something chaotic hovering off the ground. She told me that she knew it was not ball lightning. She had experienced ball lightning when it shot right through her mum's screen door when she was younger. No, this was vigorously vibrating, almost like it was sucking up light, but at the same time, it glowed a dark red. She left everything hanging on the line and in the basket, grabbing only her babies. She ran into the house, locking both the big wooden screen and kitchen door behind her. My sister started crying because she left her ragdoll outside on the grass, but Mama was not about to go back out there and get it. She said that she told the kids to be very quiet while she peeked out the back window. And that's when she saw this thing move across the lawn like a floating balloon. She continued on by telling me that as this thing passed through the 3 sheets on the clothesline, one of those sheets got shredded. She described them as looking like they were being sliced with a razor. She said that there were pieces of material flying all over, but nothing else on the lines moved. It then travelled, looking like it was going to pass, but it stopped and backed up to pass over my sister's doll, shredding it too into pieces as well. My mom said that her heart was beating out of her chest, and she was trying to keep her babies quiet while at the same time not taking her eyes off this thing. She was so scared it was going to come into the house. It lingered a moment, almost contemplating its next move, and at that point, Mom said that she started to pray. It then turned and drifted away, just like that. She said it was beyond frightening. My sister confirmed the story, saying, "How could I ever forget that?" Mom never found out what that was, but she said that it made her pay attention to her surroundings a little more. I work at a doggy daycare. We're temporarily in an old house, but it's fine, because most of the day we're hiking the dogs in the mountains. We have 3 rooms that we separate the dogs into, so that dogs have clashing personalities don't fight. A main room and 2 smaller rooms. Whatever lives there is harmless and loves animals, but is very active. The first of my experiences was when I was alone. My co-worker was walking one of the older dogs with a bum leg that can't go on the hike. In one of the smaller rooms, mopping, when the dogs in the main room all started losing their shit. I heard a young woman say, "It's okay, doggies, it's okay." And I thought, oh, my co-worker must be back. So I went to the main room, and there was no one there. My co-worker gets back about 10 minutes later, and I'm immediately like, "Hey, did you come in the house, or were you walking around the outside or something?" And she says, "No, I walked about 5 blocks." Like 2 nights later, me and my boss were there late feeding the dogs, and she bolted the front door, walked through a door into the room I was in, and within 5 seconds of her coming into my room, we heard a click and went to the front door, which is now unlocked again. After this, I started asking my co-workers, the one who currently lives there, we have someone live there to keep an eye on the boarding dogs at night, and he said, yeah, weird shit happens all the time, but refused to tell me any stories. The other co-worker who used to live there doing the same job before said that she had a plant room that she would keep closed because she didn't want her cats eating her plants. The living space is the top floor and the dogs live on the lower floor. But she would always come back and the door would be open and the cat would be in the room. The cat would stand by the door meowing to get in because it really liked chewing plants. So she bought a hook lock for the door. She came home after running to the grocery store and the lock was unhooked and the door was open. She gave up trying to protect her plants after that. This happened 2 days ago, and I don't know how to classify it other than weird. So my best friend and I went out after months of not seeing each other, because she was on vacation and studying for her college finals. She's from a village half an hour out of my town, and I've been living here for almost 7 years, maybe more. This town is my mum's hometown, and I've been visiting it all my life. But in recent years, like around 2010, the town expanded in size and new neighbourhoods and constructions appeared that I hadn't seen when I would visit during the summers. My mum's hometown always had this eerie feeling to it, and I would sense it as a child, and it's because it has a lot of history. It's existed since the late 7th to early 6th millennium BC, and it's proved to be inhabited by people in 323 BC. Major battles took place, and around the area that we have 2 mass graves at each end of the town, and all of us have had family members who died and were buried there. My family didn't settle in this town until the early 1910s, but that's a different story. The thing is that I felt its eerie aura since I was a kid, and it used to excite me, but when I moved there, it concerned me how in some areas of the town, it would be so heavy. That feeling would cause me headaches and even nosebleeds. And even though I lived for almost half of my teenage years, I hadn't explored the town to its full extent, because I feared for my safety and my friends weren't big on exploring. Until 2 days ago, my best friend and I would go sit in a coffee shop and discussed whatever. But that day, we needed not to be heard or interrupted by familiar faces or passing friends. So we started strolling around the town when we were at a crossroads, and I asked where she wanted to go. She considered me a local, so she told me to choose, and I did. We walked for a very long time, ending up in a very new neighbourhood with very well-built homes, and very few elderly people sitting in their porches or out in the streets with their plastic chairs. But we did see a lot of cats roaming around. We said hi to these elderly people, and we saw it as custom and the polite thing to do. We kept walking. We reached another crossroads, and this time I chose to continue walking on the same path we were on. It was very quiet and the sky was already cloudy and showed signs of rain coming. But as we reached the top of a small uphill, we saw a kiosk and the sky became darker at that moment. It was a very familiar kiosk for both of us, making us go, huh? And look at each other. I instantly got hit with a memory of toddler me being instructed by my late maternal grandma to go sit at the kiosk while I hold my T-Rex and Cinderella figurines and my red toy car. I was dressed in dark blue overalls with a black and white striped shirt underneath, and I had my red pacifier hanging from its chain clipped on the only pocket in the chest area of the overalls. I was sitting in the kiosk and playing with my toys while I would hear grandma's mumbling, and then I would shyly look towards them, and then at a woman cleaning the stairs at this place, while a young girl with a pink dress and blondish brown hair was standing next to her holding a bucket. I made eye contact with the girl and went over to them and handed her my Cinderella figurine and asked her to play, but the woman told us no. So I left and went back to the kiosk where there was a man with a very weird hat sitting there. I sat next to him and kept playing with my T-Rex when he asked me why a girl like me was dressed as a boy and played with boys' toys. And I turned and said that I loved T-Rex and red cars more than dolls, but not more than teddy bears. Then I asked him why he wore this weird hat and said it was a family heirloom, and I just nodded and went back to playing. After a while, I noticed that he was staring at me and then asked me why I was by myself. And I said I wasn't, and that my grandma is inside talking to her friends. Just as I finished my sentence, Grandma came out and grabbed my hand and she asked me who I was talking to. I told her the man with the tall hat and then pointed at the kiosk, but it was empty. Grandma then lectured me on talking to strangers all the way home. I was shaken out of my memory when my best friend shook my arm, saying why I was staring at an empty space for 5 minutes. And I told her that I've been here before and walked closer to check what the building said. At that moment, my best friend said she's been here before when she was a child, and she used to help her aunt clean this place, and that she stained her favourite pink dress with chlorine the last time she was here. I looked at her shocked and asked her if she recalled being a folk dance studio, and she shrugged, saying that she didn't know how to read back then and had no idea. The building was the 7th kindergarten of our town, but the surrounding area looked newly built, barely a decade-old buildings. Even the building of the kindergarten looked new, but the kiosk looked old. I told my best friend that I've been here as a kid when a voice from the house next to the building told us that we would look too old to have visited this part of town as kids, and that this party started being inhabited in 2005. We looked at her and we say that we were born in 1999 and 1997, so it was possible. The woman shrugged and we decided to put it past us. But it felt weird looking at the kiosk, and what about the man in the tall hat? Did I really meet my best friend as kids before unknowingly meeting her as teens at Comic-Con again? And later, as we sat our high school graduating and exams, we met at the hallway of my school, as I loaned her my fan and she gave me her notebook to fan myself, because it was during a heat wave. Then our common friend introduced us, and that was the beginning of our friendship. The minutes of being before that building felt odd, as if time had slowed down and then got scared out of our minds when the woman from the house next to the building talked to us. I asked my best friend if she felt the weird vibe of the place, and she said no, but she remembers feeling ashamed of being here and didn't want to stay longer, and that's why she started walking away sooner than I did. I was packing my things to head to my college city for my residency, and due to the overwhelming hot weather that came out of nowhere, I had to unpack my summer clothes to take with me. Chose my best shirts, and as I was refolding them, I tried to think about outfit options, trying to measure for how many days these outfits will last me, when my mind drifted off topic, as it usually does. When my mind went back to the current topics, the war in Ukraine, climate change, my country's economy, and about my future, I wondered what has become of us as humanity when I started mechanically folding my shirts, and I picked up my blue shirt. My blue shirt has letter prints on it that I usually wasn't able to make out or try too hard to read, because I thought it was from a Chinese thrift store, and I knew it wouldn't make sense since many times the shirts have grammatical errors or the sentences are gibberish. I picked up my shirt to take a better look at it and see the sleeve length is good for the weather, when I saw the shirt's letter prints, and weirdly, I could make it out. It read, "What we think we became." And I froze. I found it very odd. Like it was a sign or something. Weather Glitch 1. This story has been told to me time and time again. It's something my maternal grandpa lived through and my mom was able to partially witness. So my grandpa and the rest of his family were visiting Greece for the summer, since at the time they were living in Sweden. So it was around the late 1970s, maybe early 1980s. I was never told the exact date. My grandpa was driving while the rest of the family, aka my grandma, my aunt Helena, and my mum were asleep. He was on a 2-lane road. The second lane led to the opposite direction, and he noticed that it was raining only in the heart of the road, and the car was sprinkled by that rain only on his side, the driver's side. He let an audible sound of surprise, which woke my mum, and she saw the road was wet from her side of the window. Confused, she asked my grandma what was happening, and Grandpa just said it was raining. Mum says that Grandpa never stopped talking about this until he died, 2 months after I was born. Weather Glitch 2. Ever since my mum, grandma, and my entire family have lived in my grandma's house, now our house. Oftentimes when it's raining in our town, most times it's only raining in the front of the house, and if someone is in the sunroom or kitchen, or the master bedroom or big bathroom, they might have completely different weather, from sunshine or just plain cloudy without rain. And when it would stop raining in the front, only then it would rain at the back of the house. It's been happening for years, so we perceive it as normal. But my sister's best friends were over a few weeks ago, and it was raining, and noticed the event and said it was weird. And that made me question why this happens so often. It's rare that it's raining on both sides of our house. Distance Glitch. I moved to my college city in late 2017, and I live at my aunt's house. During the time I'm there, I'm in charge of the house. I have to clean it, cook for myself, etc. It used to take 10 to 15 minutes to get to my most frequently used bus stops. Around 20 minutes to get to the nearest supermarket, and 20 minutes to return, meaning you spent 40 minutes coming and going without adding the time you spend inside the store. In 2018 and 2019, I had timed myself as I had to go to the supermarket and have a shower and be ready in 1.5 hours, but I needed to go grocery shopping. It took me 30 minutes in total to come and go and even shop, because I knew the aisles were and where the items were that I needed, and I was walking pretty fast. I wasn't tired at all. Pandemic comes and the world opens up again. I find another residency, so I live at my aunt's house again because it's easier. And here's where things get wonky. The distances are bigger. How the hell is this possible? Also, there's more shops around and it's more centre-y in this part of the area. Yes, they finished the entrance and exit of the metro, and the iron covers were lifted, and the pavement was freed so you didn't have to risk walking on the street. But that doesn't make sense how it takes me 30 to 40 minutes to get to the supermarket, because it feels like an entire block was added that I have to cross by. Furthermore, opposite the supermarket, there weren't any stores. Now, there's a pharmacy, and it says it's been there since the 1980s, and it looks old. Plus, the supermarket seems to have grown by at least 3 or 4 aisles. You used to walk from the pasta aisle to the tea and baby formula aisle, and then the liquor and nuts aisle, which led you to the chips aisle and juices aisle. Now, you walk to the pasta aisle, which takes you to a second dessert aisle, then the baby formula aisle, to the liquor and nuts aisle, and suddenly you see a third dessert aisle, and then you have the soda and water aisle along with the juice aisle. The water and soda aisle was always mixed by the juice aisle, meaning that the supermarket has grown 3 or 4 aisles, yet it's the same length on the outside. What Doctor Who mindfuck is this? Why suddenly does it take me 10 minutes longer? AKA, I need an hour to come and go to the supermarket and 15 minutes to my most used bus stops. My walking pace has changed, and also I get tired all the time whenever I do the route. It feels every time like I did the most exhausting exercise ever. At first, I thought that it was because I wasn't used to it, and I've added a few kilos due to the pandemic and health issues. But I've been doing this route for 2 to 3 months now, and I've toned and lost a few pounds because of this. And yet I still feel as if I'm fighting some sort of invisible force. Suddenly, my aunt's house is further uphill than it used to be. What's happening? And to add more to this, in 2017 for the first time, I had to go to the supermarket, and I had seen one while returning home on the bus. I mentally noted the bus stop, and I waited for the bus at my regular bus stop. The bus comes, and I'm at the supermarket that isn't the one I mentioned above. It's a different building and area, but the same supermarket chain. I finish my shopping and I go home. Yet throughout the entire time I'm feeling dizzy and disoriented, and I had to open a bottle of lemon juice and pay for it later, because I had just started seeing black spots in my vision. And one worker said I looked pale, and helped me to sit down on top of a stepping stool. No idea why I was dizzy to this day. I just felt wrong. The following week, I need another grocery run, so I climb the bus again and I wait patiently for the bus stop I went to the previous week. That bus stop never came. We didn't even cross that neighbourhood. I asked the driver and he said the bus 33 doesn't cross that route. The previous week I had used bus 33 because it's the only bus going through the bus stop I used. The only supermarket the bus stops at is the same one that I mentioned earlier, and it's about 20 minutes away then and 30 minutes away now. In 2019, the bus 33 changed its route, returning to home base, and it started going through the neighbourhood and area of the supermarket I used the first time I went shopping in 2017. Realising this, I'd gotten so dizzy and I almost fainted. Thanks to the mist behind me, she caught me and made me sit down. The route hasn't changed again since, and every time we cross that supermarket, I'm reminded of that time. Any thoughts? Theories? Around December 2020, my parents contracted the rampant illness that was ravaging the world. My 89-year-old grandmother, Mom's mom, ended up sick as well following a hospitalisation well into January. After recovering from the illness, she went to a fancy rehab facility that was supposed to help her get her strength back up. Prior to being sick, she was still able to walk and feed herself. Instead of helping my grandmother, who suffered from dementia, the staff there left her alone in her room without food and water for 3 days. It wasn't until 3 days passed that she was hospitalized again for severe dehydration. Unfortunately, my parents were unable to sue the rehab facility despite the apparent and obvious elderly neglect and abuse. My grandmother returned to their home in February 2021, bedridden and in hospice care. It was at this time my mother called me to fly down and help her care for her. It's extremely hard watching someone you love slowly die, and I flew down immediately to help my mother and grandmother. She didn't live for more than a month after that. Every day was a challenge to get her to eat and drink. There were good days when she was there, and she'd smile and talk to her dogs. Sometimes she'd even return the "I love you" I told her every night. I would help get her into the wheelchair, and we watched TV together, and even go out into the backyard to bask in the sunlight. I tried to spend as much time with her as possible, because deep down, I had regrets of never spending enough time with my dad's mother before she passed away early in 2020. I stayed up from 2 p.m. to 7 a.m. constantly, keeping watch over my grandma. One night, I could tell it was finally time, and as my mother, father and I stood around her to ensure she wasn't alone when she passed, I held her hand, reassuring her that it was okay to go. I never knew how heavy her passing would hit me. I held my emotions well, working in the medical field, but my regret still lingered. Did I do enough to help her? She passed around 3 a.m. and the doctor arrived around 5 a.m. The funeral home around 7 a.m. But I was so tired I didn't see them wheel her out. I passed out at 7 a.m. and didn't wake up until 2 p.m. I had a dream so real that it still shakes me to my core today. I can still remember it vividly. In my dream, I was in a reception room or lobby. It was all white and blinding almost. The room was symmetrical, with two sides of the room having small wings with chairs to sit and wait. The middle towards the back had a large closed-off reception desk that was closed, and on either side of that office space was a door on the left and a door on the right. I was standing towards the left side door, and I saw my grandma in her pyjamas, standing near the front entrance. I ran over to her, excited to see her, and she in turn looked excited as well. She was so enthusiastic and happy as she talked to me. For the life of me, I cannot recall a single thing she said, as she was so full of energy and beaming with joy. After talking to me for a few minutes, she told me she had to go. I could tell she was happy and no longer in any pain. As I watched her walk past me towards the back door on the left, my grandmother began to change. She started turning younger and healthier. It was watching her turn back in time to her prime again. The closer she got to the door, the more youthful she looked. And when she was gone, I woke up so suddenly with a sense of panic. The meaning was so clear, and yet my mind was still in shock. To the best of my ability, I can only say my mind created an interpretation of the gates of heaven, to the best of my interpretation. Created something in a form that I could accept. And there my grandmother said goodbye. She alleviated all my regrets and worries. It was clear how happy and content she was, free from pain and suffering. At her funeral, I tried to tell my aunts and uncles the dream again, hoping in some way that it could alleviate their pain as it did for me. And in some way, I hope the story can help others feel at peace too. But now, I'm genuinely worried I'm going crazy. I have a psychologist, you see. She thinks it's stress, but to me, it feels like it did when I had sleep paralysis. There was definite sleep paralysis, but then a couple of episodes that were hauntings. After the grabbing stopped just under a week ago, I was pretty relieved. I was going about my normal routine, where I walk my dog at the only dog beach in the area. It's underneath a large cliff, and sadly, someone took their life at this beach a few months ago. I was the chaplain who was tasked with blessing and cleansing the area. It was a little seedy at first, but I've never had much trouble there since. A few days ago, I was walking my pup. To get to the beach, you have to walk down a long alleyway. An important thing to note is my dog is really poor at dealing with strangers. She was socialised during lockdowns, so she barks like mad at people. I was walking her down this alleyway when she spun 180 degrees and started flipping a nut at someone. I turned and I saw them in my peripheral, so automatically went to apologise. But once I had completely spun, there was no one there. She was still going mental. I shrugged it off, figured she'd heard something and I was just tired. But something like this has happened every day since. I woke up in sweats and saw someone standing at the door we left open for the pup to go to the toilet. It's a securely fenced area and we're in a safe neighbourhood. It would be very noisy and difficult to get to this area. Again, my dog charged the door and started barking. And after blinking and focusing for a few seconds, there was nothing. This thing was the size of the door and as broad as it too. Those are the two big ones. Other than that, I've been seeing shapes of people in reflections of doors and windows, or people walking on the sidewalk at night who aren't there. I had a psych evaluation about a month ago, but I'm going to ask for another one. I'm also going to talk to my doctor about it again. He also thought it was stress related. I haven't been incredibly stressed, but it's always hard to tell with these things. Anyway, I'm just hoping to keep bringing you guys on this journey. It's fascinating, and I'm still not really scared. But it's definitely ramped up since I've started helping people here. I recently heard about this app that apparently lets you see and communicate with the spiritual world. It sounded interesting and a potentially potent tool for a chaplain such as myself who, as part of their role, seeks out and combats dark paranormal events and entities. If you haven't heard of the app, it's worth looking into, but not worth using. What was my methodology? My hypothesis was that the app does the same thing as crony mediums, and throws out information and relies on interaction to zero in on themes and lucky guesses. Firstly, I took the app to a mundane place in my house, and watched as it recorded low levels of activity. It still spat out some words, and in this part, I had a no communication policy to see how the app would react. It said, "Do not," "Where," and "Who is she?" I did these things when I was alone in, intentionally hilariously, the toilet. None of the responses made sense. My next investigation was to a spot where someone passed tragically, that people say is haunted. Same thing, zero communication. That time the words I got were angel, closer, where am I? After some time, I started saying random words, not relative to the words on screen, and the paranormal activity ramped up. The words still didn't make sense. They were toy, hammer, bedroom. This haunting spot is outside at an intersection with traffic lights. Finally, I tried communication at an allegedly haunted spot and got, "I'm lying," "Why?" "I'm lost," and "Hello," in that order. My conclusion? The app relies on your preconceived idea of its success. You'll enter into an interaction with it with a heavy confirmation bias and search for reasons why the literally random words it's spitting out will make sense. You form the story, picture, and correlations in your head. People seem adamant the app can isolate information only the dead would know. Funnily enough, an evidence strategy used by fake mediums. It would appear the app works off of whatever information you can give it, with me wondering if there's a speech-to-text conversion aspect. The app just throws out random words, and you do the rest of the work for it. My professional opinion is that the app is false and deceptive. This is a very brief summary of the investigation. There were several other things I tried, but I found no concrete information of the app being an actual means to communicate with the dead. I leave my PC on. It's a freestanding desktop unit, and it has a dim white light as its on button, which casts a little bit of light on the ceiling. I live in a fairly large room. It's almost its own unit. It just doesn't have a kitchen. Half the room is a bedroom, the other half is an area with a fridge, washing machine and sink. When I was finally ready to actually fall asleep, the light on the roof seemed to dim greatly and disappear at the edges. I had to blink and double take to make sure what I was seeing was happening, and I thought it was either my eyes being tired or just odd light stuff. But when I was trying to focus on it, it was like the light was being washed away by shadow. Then I got a feeling of incredible dread, which I tried to rationalise as a subconscious response to what I was seeing. But I couldn't help looking around the room. Standing in the opposite corner of the room by the fridge was a tall, dark, slender figure, the height of the roof, staring at me. Its proportions didn't make sense. It had no neck, and its arms were the length of its entire body to the ground. I was incredibly confused and locked eyes with it for a few seconds before rolling over and hoping that it was my eyes playing tricks on me. Again, I couldn't help myself. So a few moments later, I looked back, and the dark, tall figure had moved closer to me and was much more prominent in my vision. Again, we locked eyes. Well, that's the best I can describe it. Its eyes were less eyes and more like two shadowy holes that were darker than the rest of its face. Then I felt an incredibly cold yank on my hand. I grabbed my phone and put the torchlight on in the area, feeling like I'm losing my marbles, and there was nothing. So I tried to shake it off again, but stayed lying on my side facing the area. As soon as I turned the torchlight off, I could see the figure standing back in its original place on the other side of the room. I knew at this point something was going on, so I went in full protective mode. I prayed, lit some frankincense and myrrh incense, tried my best to bless the room, and then for the first time in my adult life, slept with a light on. It was technically my computer screen left on facing away from my bed. It was the only way I could sleep. I've since blessed the room and include my blessing in my nightly routine, but I appreciate having a place to vent about this. It all started when I was renting an apartment for uni. I never had paranormal experiences before that. I saw how the apartment was pretty cheap and close to my college, but alas, it was also pretty small. I had no other choice, so I rented it. For the first couple of weeks, nothing spectacular happened. I went to school, and when I got back, I studied, enjoyed some entertainment, etc. One night, around 2 AM, I turned off my laptop and headed to bed. On my way there, I heard a chilling sound of someone breathing out directly next to my ear. It took me a few seconds to even register it, since it never happened before to me. I got scared and tried to find the cause of the sound, but I couldn't. Next day, I tried to forget about it, and I did. Then, around the same time, 2 AM, I was taking a late shower, and as I washed my hair, I heard the same chilling sound right next to my ear. I freaked out and pulled the curtains. I thought that someone broke into my apartment, but the door was locked and the key was still inside. Then, it didn't happen again for months. I had some personal problems and dropped out and went to live back home. Then as I was trying to sleep, the same sound. I was freaked out, thinking that whatever that was, it followed me home. I heard it again after a few months, and last month I really freaked out. Unlike every time, I only hear the breathing sound once. Last month, I kept hearing continuous breathing for an hour. Even my dog didn't feel well that night. When I tried to ignore it, it seemed frustrating. It would breathe louder and faster. Every time I heard it, I got chills, even after hearing it for so long. I still hear it sometimes, but now I want to talk about what I see. I have sleep paralysis pretty often, I guess. I'm not stressed out or anything, but it happens. After returning from my stay in the apartment, I've had many episodes of sleep paralysis where I see a woman with dirty black hair looking at me, or sometimes even on top of me. Last night, I felt someone grabbing me and hugging me from behind, and I quickly moved, out of shock I guess. I saw that there was no one behind me, but when I leaned over and looked down, I was on a bunk bed. I saw a woman's head staring back at me. I just put my head back on the pillow and pretended like nothing happened. I can move sometimes during sleep paralysis, like waving around my arms or something like that. So I thought it was sleep paralysis and went back to sleep. After that, I woke up 2 more times with someone on top of me, poking me, touching me, etc. I don't know if that was just sleep paralysis or something else, but I'm pretty sure I'm haunted, at least from the sounds I hear. Any way to get rid of it, or at least communicate with my ghost? Should I make a DIY Ouija board or something? So some years ago, I worked at a nursing home. And let me tell you, if you don't believe, you will after working at one. Now, due to HIPAA laws, I will change names of people and the name of the place. And to be fair, they deserve their privacy, as we all do. Anyway, we'd have many experiences, from weird happenings in the bathroom, voices from nowhere, and seeing curious orbs on videos. But I have 2 stories I wish to share. The first being very sad, and the second being scary. I'm very sensitive to spirits. I can both hear them whispering and feel them around me. The first was about a woman named Nancy. When she first came to live in the home, she was fine and was very much in her right mind. But within months, she began to have falls, sadly losing it and ripping up her own skin with her nails. She was finally coming to the end of her life. And one day, while she remained in her bed, I kept feeling something messing with my hair, and I'd get the feeling to go check on Nancy. I'd check in on her as she was still hanging in there, but as I'd walk out and down the hall, I'd feel overwhelmed with sadness, and I didn't understand why. But I checked on her multiple times that day, and the same thing would happen, no matter what. I checked on her one last time around dinner time, and she was still with us. But shortly after dinner, my partner checked on her with me, and she was gone. To this day, I don't know if a loved one was guiding me, or maybe she just wanted someone there so her soul would call to mine. But I do know she was finally at peace. Now for the second story I have, we had a man who came to the home, and as I looked at him, I knew I didn't like him. At first I couldn't tell you why I didn't like him, I just felt something was off about him. Now Bob's first day with us, he seemed fine. No outburst or strange behaviour, but that changed the very next day. That morning, my partner and I came to help him get ready for the day. He decided he'd rather fight us, so needless to say, it was a long morning. At lunch, I was behind a resident in the feeding room, and Bob ended up in the feeding room as he wasn't feeding himself, but also wouldn't take help. Suddenly, while I was behind another resident across from him, he threw his soap at us, and shortly after, he was sent away. Now before the next part, I should explain that all the residents get their picture taken and placed in front of the room so they can figure out where they stay. Now at dinner time, I finished helping a gentleman who wanted to eat in bed but needed help. And as I walked past Bob's room, something about Bob's picture caught my eye. It took me a minute, but then I saw in the background a shadow figure moving behind Bob. I quickly got my partner and other co-workers to show them, and I finally understood why I didn't like Bob. Because of the shadow figure that attached itself to him, and clearly it meant harm. A few weeks later, we learned Bob had died while out. Everyone thought death was following him, but with us working with death every day, I knew that wasn't it, because death is far more peaceful. I'm fairly certain it was a demon, to be honest. I'm currently staying with my dad in my childhood home, while my apartment is being renovated. We live in northern part of Texas, a few hours from Oklahoma, and close to Palo Duro Canyons for geographical context. It's an extremely small town, less than 1,000 people, and no stores or gas stations. I got home from work late, around 10:30 p.m, and my parents were both in bed. I parked my car about halfway to my front door, and I heard a man's voice behind me say, "What are you doing?" Every hair on my body went straight up, and normally, being a Texan from a rural community, I carry a pistol in my waistband. Coyotes and all kinds of other wildlife like to make their way into town near houses, and it's mostly for safety from them, or any serial killers pulling off the highway that bypasses town, looking for his next victim. You never know. Tonight was the one night I didn't have that pistol in my pocket. I walked faster to the door and got inside as quickly as possible. I couldn't run because of a leg injury that's left me pretty limpy most of the time. I checked that both of my parents were in the house and made sure they weren't pulling a joke on me, and I grabbed the rifle by the door and went out to investigate. There wasn't any sign of someone being around, and my dad's 2 dogs in the backyard didn't make a peep. They normally go crazy barking when someone is that close on the property. My dog, who was inside at the time, was doing everything possible to try and get outside with me. He's very protective and has gone after multiple people who have tried to hurt me. I don't think this dog knows what fear is. I'm not convinced it was a neighbour either. We've had the same neighbours around here for 10 plus years, and I know them all very well. None of them would be concerned about coming over. They know my car. It's the same one I've been driving since high school, so they know I'm not some stranger. I know all of their voices. I've had coffee with many of them, and during the summers we always exchange vegetables from the gardens. This wasn't even close to a voice I recognised. I've lived in 3 haunted homes here in Oklahoma. The homes were located in Geary, Yukon, and El Reno, Oklahoma. I'm wondering if anyone has any stories that are similar to mine. 1. Yukon. This home was very active with physical spirits. Things would constantly move on their own. You could walk past a chair, kids' toys, or anything that a human uses, such as a wall phone, and the items would move at random. My brother had a toddler's tricycle, cliché I know, and it would cycle by itself in the home. We would come home and find the house looking ransacked quite a bit, and there was no break-in or anything missing. A few times, the washer and dryer both had been disconnected and moved into the kitchen area on their own after a 5-minute trip to the convenience store. There was an apparition of a little girl that would want to play with us kids, and she would only show up occasionally at night time. We constantly heard disembodied voices and knocking throughout the home. Most of the time, the knocking happened in the master bedroom and living room. Geary. This home was built in 1975 and was bought by my mother and her ex-husband around 2009 and had 1 previous owner. This home was mainly haunted by a playful spirit. TVs would shut themselves off, lights would turn off and on by themselves, and occasionally things would fall off of a shelf or out of a cabinet. This home wasn't very active. El Reno. This home I rented for about a year. It was built around 1950 as a duplex home, but was restored into a single home by the time I rented it. This home was very active, not unlike the first location. This home had shadow people and violent happenings. Doors would slam shut. Many unexplained noises would happen, such as glass being broken and heavy footsteps running through the house. I saw many shadow beings while living there, mostly in the master bedroom. One night, I was home watching TV when I heard what sounded like a brick being thrown through the bay window, immediately followed by the sound of footsteps. I ran outside onto the porch and dialed 911. The police cleared the home and found nothing. I looked for myself and there was not any broken glass, no forced entry, and nothing out of place. I had recurring sleep paralysis while living there as well. This home scared me the most. I'm not sure where to start. These are true events, things I've personally experienced. I own and have been living in my house for about 11 years now. I have a husband, 3 children, and 2 dogs. It's a small home that was built in the early 1900s. It had an addition put on it in the early 1970s. I haven't disturbed anything since I moved in, except to paint or hang things. We regularly experience strange goings-on, which we attribute to the age of the home. Chills, sounds, bats in the house, seeing things from the periphery of our vision. Rarely are the events so alarming that I reach out to anyone. Once I was home alone, and a random penny rolled across the carpeted floor, seemingly from nowhere. The dogs will not go into the basement, even when the tornado sirens are going off and we're begging and trying to drag them. A little stone raven statue that disappears and reappears from a high shelf. No way could my kids reach it. Things like that. Those things didn't and still don't bother me. I'm accepting of the fact that there may be things here that I can't explain. The thing that's getting to me, however, is my bedroom. I'm rearranging it, patching holes in the plaster from nails and screws, getting ready to lay down a fresh coat of paint. It's during all of this the other day that I noticed my room suddenly developed an echo. It never had an echo. My children have even noticed it now, the random echo. I'm wondering if this is something that could be explained away by science, or if it's one of those things. I've lived in the same house for nearly 20 years. My family has always said they've seen or heard things, but I never really did. That was until around 1.5 years ago. I was home alone walking through to take a shower, and I heard 3 loud knocks. I went to the door and no one was there. So I go jump in the shower, and right as I put shampoo in, 3 slamming knocks on the bathroom door, like they were the police. I said, "Yeah, I'm in here," thinking my family had come back. Then I heard my name. "Mark, what?" I said. Then I hear, "He's already here." "Who's already here?" And no reply. I finished getting out of the shower, and the house is empty. I called my family to see if maybe they left again, and they were still at the mall. I tell them what happened, and they say it happens to them all the time, and I didn't believe them. So cut to a few weeks later. Now, I should tell you, I sleep in complete darkness. So I start waking up at 3:33 every night, with a feeling of dread and being watched. And when I open my eyes, even though it's pitch black, I can see a shadow right beside my bed. Its head, if that's what you'd call it, reaches to the ceiling, and I can feel it staring at me. I reach over and turn the lights on, and it's gone. The feeling of dread vanishes. This goes on for months, to the point I get used to it and ignore it altogether, and just roll over and go back to sleep. Then I start hearing things moving around my room in the dark. Things being stepped on. I could hear what sounds like someone sitting down on my couch, because you can hear the springs compressing. And the feelings of dread return. So I start sleeping with my fan on full blast, so that's all I can hear. It again gets worse. I wake up at 3:33 as always. Dread overcomes me, as I feel someone sit on the edge of my bed. I jump out of bed and turn the light on. Nothing there. At this point, I've had enough and I needed to take control. So a few days later, I was alone sitting in the living room watching Netflix. I hear what sounds like someone running down the hall and then 3 knocks on my bedroom door. I stood up and yelled, "This is my house. Show yourselves. I'm tired of you messing with me while I'm sleeping." I hear nothing. "What? Are you too afraid to come out?" Still nothing. That's when I really messed up. I screamed, "You're just a fucking scared little bitch. You won't do anything to me because you can't do anything. This is my fucking house." And some other stuff I don't remember. But that's when it got way, way worse. That night as I was sleeping, and right beside my head, boom, 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 3 hard knocks and someone screaming, "Wake up!" I jump up and run out to see what's wrong, and everyone is asleep. And I look at the clock and it's 3:35, so I start walking back to my room, and I see a head pop out from the top of my door like someone's hanging upside down. No features, just darkness. I freeze, the paralyzing fear I felt giving me goosebumps just thinking about it. It stays there for 20 to 30 seconds and then slowly goes back up out of sight. I wasn't going back there that night after seeing that. I go to my living room and sit on the couch with all the lights on. Then I heard a crash in my room. Then I hear faint laughter and then silence. When the sun finally came up, because I didn't sleep at all, I went back to see what that crash was, and everything on my nightstand had been thrown and was laying on the other side of the room. There were handprints where I had seen faces that had a greenish glow to them. For the next month, I was tormented by almost nightly shadows that seemed to run towards me and then would vanish. The door slamming behind me closing into a closet or basement. That really scared the shit out of me. Things would randomly disappear, then days or weeks later, reappearing in the middle of my bedroom floor. People calling my name. Knocks all day and night. After a month of it getting worse and worse, I talked to someone who was into paranormal things like this, and they said I needed to stop talking to it because I'm feeding its energy and it's getting stronger the more attention I give it. So I just acted like it didn't exist, and things have calmed down some. But it's been over a year since it started, and still I wake up all the time at either 3:33 or 3:35 and feel someone looking at me or someone sitting on my bed or walking down the hallway. But I ignore it and just roll over, cover every bit of my body except the top of my head, and ignore it and go back to sleep. The knocks still happen all the time while I'm taking a shower, and I'll hear "Hey" or "Mark" as I'm walking to the kitchen. I wanted to get a camera and put it in my room and see what happens, but I'm kind of afraid of what I'll see. I was carving a woodblock in my studio at school about 2 years ago. I share this space with about 25 other people, and it's the size of a small airplane hangar, but we all have our own designated spots, and mostly leave each other alone while working. Another detail is that I was pretty sure I was completely alone there, because there was the beginning of the semester and nobody was crunching late at night yet. It was about 2 or 3 a.m, and my neck was craned down as I was intensely doing this carving. Suddenly, out of my peripheral vision, I see these dark brown leather dress shoes and formal pants approach me. I didn't bother to look up because it was probably another classmate I didn't know who was in the studio. However, when the shoes finally made their way right to under my vision, I noticed that their footsteps made no noise at all. It also crossed my mind that a fellow sculpture student wouldn't be wearing such attire for work. I thought somebody was probably curious to see what I was working on. And I looked up, wondering who it could possibly be. Nobody was there. Whoever had been standing right in front of me had vanished. I looked back down and the shoes and pants I saw before were gone as well. I immediately put my tools down, grabbed my bag, and left. I was very unsure of what had happened and blamed the occurrence on sleep deprivation. However, last month, a fellow classmate and I found each other exchanging scary stories, and they mentioned how they were in their studio late at night alone and saw leather shoes and formal pants approach them, only for them to look up and see nobody there. The conditions they were in were also similar to mine. Once we realised we experienced the same thing at separate times without knowing about each other's experiences, we were very much shook. Our school has a dark history too. There were slaves on my campus, and our building was sandwiched between the slave owner's house and a graveyard where the slaves and masters were buried. You can assume I didn't work late nights alone again. When I lived in my parents, moved out at 20 years old, 6 years ago, we lived in a 10-floor apartment building. It wasn't a super old building, but the vast majority of tenants have always been elderly people, and at least a couple of people have passed away in one of the apartments. There was also a rumour, unconfirmed to this day, that shortly after the building was built, there was a lonely old man who hung himself on the roof and wasn't found for months. My parents and I have all had a bunch of ghostly experiences, many of which had similarities. My parents still live there, and interestingly, they said that all of those experiences came to a sudden stop as soon as I moved out. I haven't really had any serious paranormal instances since moving out, so I don't think that whatever was messing with us followed me. Maybe they just moved on to a different family in another unit. I believe I was 18 years old at the time. I was home alone as I had the day off from college and work, while both of my parents were at work. I remember that it was around noon and I was still in bed, but kind of half asleep, half awake. I was suddenly jolted awake by the extremely loud sound of radio static. My dad kept a radio in the bathroom that he listened to every single morning while he showered, but he always remembered to turn it off afterwards. He had the same morning routine for years and never forgot to turn it off. He also never changed the station, so I don't know how it would have been on an inactive station to achieve radio static in the first place. I was immediately wary, but still convinced myself to get up and take a look around the apartment. I went to the bathroom first and turned the radio off and unplugged it for good measure. Then, I slowly made my way around the apartment to confirm that nobody else was home. As I made it to the living room, at the opposite end of the apartment from the bathroom, I heard the radio static blast again. I let out a little scream, jumped probably a damn foot into the air, and then froze. I felt every hair on my body stand up. I felt the familiar feeling of being watched. I sprinted to the bathroom to find the radio plugged back in, still blasting radio static. I ripped the plug out of the pocket and then bolted back to my bedroom and slammed the door shut. I sat in my room against the door, freaking out. I grabbed my cell phone and was about to call my mom to ask what time she was coming home from work. Despite being terrified, I didn't want to seem like a wimp, I guess. When I swear on my life, I heard the exact sound of a key unlocking our apartment door, the door opening, and my mother's voice calling my name. She'd always call out to let me know she was home. Relief washed over me. I sprang up and flung my bedroom door open, only to walk into the hall to dead silence. My mom wasn't home. I was still alone. At that moment, I just wanted to scream and cry, but no sound came out of my mouth. I simply sprang back into my room, sat back down against my door, and called my mom in a panic. I didn't care now if she knew I was scared. I didn't want to be alone anymore. I ended up being home alone for an additional 2 hours, and thankfully, nothing else occurred, other than the persistent feeling that I was being watched. To this day, I still can't believe how precisely the voice sounded, like my mom calling out my name. That part freaked me out more than the radio being plugged back in into the wall. There was a bunch of different creepy and downright scary occurrences that happened to all three of us, but nothing ever scared me more than what happened that day.